What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Chop It Up Sports. I'm your host, Carter Stedman, and today we're going to be going through my top 10 moments of track and field at the at the Paris Olympics here in 2024. Before we get started, I just want to kind of cover this Olympics. This was, in my opinion, one of the more well put together events in Paris that we've seen. I just felt like everything was very well organized. I really liked being able to see the different sports, and even though a lot of these events are going on while we're asleep here on in the Western Hemisphere over in America, I really like being able to just wake up and have my cup of coffee and be able to watch this variety of sports. And it made for some really good entertainment. We were able to see track and field. Obviously, for the U.S. was dominant. The men's basketball team wins gold. Just some awesome moments here that we were able to see this summer. And obviously in the summer months when there's not a lot going on, when it is an Olympic year, it makes it really easy to get something on the TV and just some sports to watch for us fanatics. So without further ado, let's get into it. I want to give some honorable mentions first. There was a lot of good moments in these Olympics, so it was really hard to narrow them down to 10. Honorable mention to Tara Davis. I thought her performance was outstanding in the women's long jump. She's been a big name in this field for some time, and now she's finally able to have her golden moment. She takes the medal there in the women's long jump. It was a competitive field. We saw her take second last year in the World Championships in Budapest. And I just feel like this was her time. It was her moment. She knew it. The crowd knew it. And she was able to take advantage of it. But it wasn't necessarily an easy path because when you go and look at it at the Olympic trials, it came down to her last jump just for her to get in. So not an easy path. It wasn't cookie cutter, but she's able to seize the moment. And I feel like she's one of those athletes where when the pressure's on and the moment's at its peak, she rises to the occasion. She was able to do that. And on her fourth jump out of six, she was able to get the gold there. So that was an awesome moment. Another honorable mention I want to give is to Masai Russell in the women's 110 hurdles. This race came down to the hundredths of a second. It was very close. It could have gone to a number of ladies. But Masai came out, and when you look at her season, a lot of ups and downs, whether it's, at the collegiate level, she'd been struggling, and then obviously going pro. It just took her a little bit to get adjusted to the circuit and just having those different meets. And, coming in, it looked like, she had a chance, but you know, she definitely wasn't a clear favorite by any means. So for her to pull that off was very impressive. And this was just, she was one of four people, honestly, out of the Americans to get a gold in the hurdles. And so that was really impressive to see that from the U.S. So let's get into it. At number 10, I have Grant Fisher, the double bronze. He comes away with two medals here in Paris in the 5K and 10K. Both these races were insane. The 10,000 really kicked off the track and field in this Olympics, where we saw it was a number of guys that were in it, a lot of Ethiopians, a lot of Kenyans. Nico Young was in there for a little bit. It looked like he was trying to make some moves, but ultimately faded off within the last mile. But Grant held in there. He was in top five positioning the whole time. He stayed on the rail. I felt like he ran a really tactical race. I will say it did get sketchy there for a minute. You see him step on the rail and he kind of rolls his ankle. And as I was watching that, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, he's still running. He's still on this adrenaline high. But when it really gets down to it, is his foot and his ankle, like, is that pain going to be able to be sustained? Is he going to be able to power through that? And fortunately, he was. I feel like one of the biggest things we've seen from Grant is his kick. We see this in a lot of long distance races. A lot of guys can hang around for 4 or 5 miles. But when it gets down to it, whether it's the last 800, 1,200 meters, and you see these guys just start to take off, a lot of times the Americans haven't had that endurance or that kick to be able to stick with that pace when it gets pretty quick. But he was able to do it. He gets the bronze in the 10K. And then about a week later, he comes back in a stacked heat that had Jakob Ingebrigtsen returning off his 1,500-meter loss. And he kind of the same situation. He's in it. There's 5 or 6 guys that could be fighting for that podium, and Grant, he gets in. It looked like he was almost going to be able to get second there for a second, I thought, but he was able to get away and get the bronze medal, which is honestly super impressive. Something we haven't seen an American do in quite some time, if not ever, I think, actually, with the double, with the 10K and the 5K. So it's been some time for the Americans to see some hardware in those distances. So that was really cool to see. And I have that at number 10. At number 9, I have the 200 meter for the men, the Let's Tobogo victory over Noah Lyles and Kenny Bernard. Obviously, coming into this race, the hype was all about Noah Lyles, how he was going to be able to get the double and win the gold and the 200 meter his event. But in the prelims, he didn't look good. He didn't look sharp. He was kind of skeptical coming out of the blocks. He didn't look as dominant on that straight stretch as he normally does. His just top end speed wasn't really there. And I think the reason he kind of got by in the 200 is because we saw his prelims in the 100 meters where he didn't look great either, but still came away with the gold. So going in the 200-meter final, obviously Lyles is the favorite. He's running around, he's screaming, and he ends up getting bronze. Turns out he has COVID, but then is still partying the day after. So kind of interesting um, approach there from Noah. But I just feel like it's a big win anytime you see these smaller countries be able to get a gold medal on the big stage. And for Tobago from Botswana, a place that doesn't see a ton of gold medals in the Olympics, this was a really cool moment for him. I think he had a lot of hype coming into this season, but throughout the year, he kind of his times weren't producing probably what people thought he was capable of. But he peaked at the right time, and that's really what this sport is all about: is being able to perform at your best when it matters the most. And Let's Tobago was able to do that. I thought Kenny had a strong performance as well, but I just think Tobago really had it, and he might have been one of the more impressive guys of the whole meet when you look at it. He runs the 100 meter in what was one of the closest races in Olympic history, where Noah takes it by 5 thousandths of a second or whatever it was. So he runs that. There's 3 races in the 100 meter. He runs the 200. He has to run that 3 times when you look at the rounds, the semis, and then the final. He wins the 200. Then he comes back for the 4x4 on a Botswana team that no one was really talking about. And I think for them to come away with the silver, he almost gets Rai Benjamin there at the end. I thought he was going to get him, but Rai was able to pull away. Just a really impressive resume when you look at what he was able to do. I mean, obviously he doesn't get a medal in the 100, but when you look at it, he probably medals in over 80% of the Olympic finals that there's ever been in that event. So really impressive stuff from Tobago, and just really fun to watch these small countries celebrate major victories when their athletes perform at the biggest stage. Number 8, I have the men's 800. The 800 doesn't have as many big names as a lot of other events do in track and field, but I did think that this was one of the closer races. It was wide open coming in. Sagaji from Algeria is obviously he had the fastest time, world lead, and he looked pretty money in his prelim. And in the semi, he looked a little rocky, but I was still pretty confident he was going to get the job done. But then you have Marco Rope, and I think his name's Winieni from Kenya, who ends up getting the gold medal there. Really came down to the last 100 meters, which is kind of how these 800s go when guys start to go to Lactic City, as I call it, and things just get rough. I mean, yeah, it's brutal. Your body's hurting, and you're trying to go as fast as you can. Like similar with a lot of these races, there's 3 or 4 guys that could take it at any given moment, and so to see that kind of neck and neck down the last 100 meters, and a rope is right on this guy's tail, was really cool to see. And Sagaji, is known for that kick. He clocked 141 multiple times this year, but I don't know if he just started too late in his kick or just didn't have as much speed as some of the other guys did. But he comes in third with the bronze, and then Bryce Hoppel was really. I was actually really impressed with what Bryce was able to do in this final. It's one of the quickest 800-meter finals we've ever seen. I mean, they're only a second off of the world record here, but really impressive. He breaks the American record, so he's the fastest American to ever run the 800. And when you look at all these individual events, this was actually the only individual event where the Americans didn't get a medal. And so for Hoppel to come in here and run an American record and still be left off the podium is pretty spectacular when you look at the guys in this heat or that were in this final. And a lot of them are young. I think we're going to see these guys back here in 2028 in LA as well. And so I think the 800 is an event that maybe didn't have as much hype coming in, but I thought was one of the more underrated events of the week. Coming in at number 7, I have Sifan Hassan with the triple. This was one of the more impressive things that I've ever seen from a track athlete, male or female. She starts out the week running the 10,000, where she takes bronze in a really competitive race, similar to the men's. A lot of guys could have taken that, and that race could have shaped out in a number of different ways. Then she comes back for the 5,000 in what's a really chippy race there with Faith Kipyegon taking second, and then she gets disqualified. So then it looked like Hassan's going to get silver. Then they put Faith back in. So then she ultimately takes the bronze. So she has double bronze halfway through the track and field events. At the end of the week, basically the last event of the entire Olympics is the women's marathon. And I didn't watch this race. I wasn't following it at all. Obviously, I knew Hassan was running it. And I wake up, um, turn on the closing ceremonies, and first highlight is the fact that she wins the marathon. And this is just insane. Like when you look at the mileage of that for the 5,000, you have to run a semi and a final. So she ran 10,000 meters there. She runs another 10,000 meters in to start the week off. She gets bronze in both of those. So that's already 10K on the legs. And then to come in and run a marathon, really just impressive stuff. It was really awesome just to see all the support that she had just from the distance running community. I mean, just the amount of work and preparation and recovery that has to take. Huge credit to her staff and everyone that was able to put her in that position because there's no way she's able to do that without having like around the clock support and recovery and nutrition. So really just impressive stuff there when you look at that. Number 6, I have Mondo. He breaks the world record in the pole vault. I would think it was pretty easy to tell early on that Mondo was going to take it. I mean, he had a couple hiccups on a couple of the heights, but I mean, in this event, he's just ran away with it. It's pretty similar to Sydney in the 400-meter hurdles. It's just his to lose. I mean, he comes in, sets the world record, and at this point, when you're watching it, all the track events are gone. Like track events have ended 20, 30 minutes ago, and the stadium is still packed watching this guy try to break the world record. He's the only guy vaulting, and he ends up getting it on his last attempt. So he really was able to build up the anticipation and the hype. And so to see him get that on his last event, really impressive stuff there from the Swedish. At number 5, I have the mixed relay final. I thought this was one of my favorite races to watch. I think it's really interesting when you get the combination of men and women running at the same time. I like that they changed it now so that there's more formality to it where you go man, woman, man, woman. And so I think when I watched this, obviously the U.S. The day before sets the world record in the prelim, and then they turn around. We knew that the Netherlands were going to make some adjustments. Team USA decides to run it back with the same team, and so we knew it was going to make for a good race. I mean, when you look at the women that the Netherlands put out there, Lieke Klaver and Femke Bol, those are two outstanding 400-meter runners. And then to have Shamir Little and Kaylen Brown out there for the Americans, they're no slouches as well. I did feel like the men on the U.S. side were a little bit more strong with Deadman and Norwood. But we knew it was going to come down to the last leg, especially with the kick that we've seen Femke have for the last couple of years. And it lived up to the hype. She splits a 47 high. I think I saw 47.9 was her official split. Could be wrong on that. So that was just really cool to see. And I mean, that was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in a relay race. She was probably, 30 to 40 meters behind. And so for her to come back and make up that gap is insane. And it wasn't even like Kaylen Brown ran a bad leg or, she like stumbled or bad handoff. It was pure speed from Femke. She did everything she was supposed to do. And for a while, I feel like that kind of built up the hype coming into the 400-meter hurdles, which ended up getting shut down pretty quickly, which we'll get to here in a second. But this mixed relay was awesome. I really like this event going forward. I think it just allows a lot of people that maybe didn't get in on their country's national team for their individual event to still be able to run at this Olympic stage. Because when you look at the U.S., you have guys like Vernon Norwood, Bryce Deadman, Matthew Boland's done it before. Just guys who are super talented and would run for basically any other country besides the United States and probably be their fastest guy. Still gives them an opportunity to compete due to the relay pool regulations. And so this mixed relay was awesome. Thought it was super special and loved what I saw there from Femke. Number 4, I have the men's 400-meter open. Quincy Hall is a dog. There's really no other way to put it. He would tell you that himself. This race was insane. A lot of talent coming into it. You got Matthew Hudson-Smith from Great Britain, Quincy Hall. Who else? With Michael Norman's in there. Just a number of guys that could have taken it. And, early on you're thinking, okay, maybe the Americans have a chance to get the sweep here. At that point, we weren't sure what the status was on Michael Norman's health. Chris Bailey had looked good. Obviously, Quincy Hall had one of the faster times in the world this year. And so early on, I'm thinking, okay, we got a chance to get two guys on the podium. And then gun goes off at 250 meters in. I'm thinking we're putting nobody on the podium. And Matthew Hudson Smith, you can kind of see with about 75, 80 meters left. Obviously, that last stretch of the 400 is brutal for those who have ran it. They totally understand. It's the longest 100-meter stretch of your life. But you see when that back starts to arch, he kind of starts to tilt his body up. I feel like that was kind of the downfall of why he wasn't able to win the race, because if you look at Quincy, yes, his form is pretty whack. He's swinging arms, he's grills out, all of that, right? But he's able to keep his momentum straight and going forward. And so when you look at that, he's really swinging those arms, a lot of movement, and just an insane comeback. I think the stats say he made up about a second, 1 second to a second and a half over the last 100 meters, which is just unheard of in a race where typically you're slowing down as the race is getting closer to the end. So insane stuff there from Quincy Hall. And just seeing the reactions of all the other people watching it. I mean, you see Ry Benjamin, who's pretty experienced in the 400-meter realm, and he was shocked. And I think everyone was when you look at that race and you see what he was able to do. Super impressive stuff. He's able to get the gold. And like we've talked about, these Americans, they really kind of dominated the meet for the most part. And Quincy Hall was just another inspirational performance for the U.S. Number three, I have Sydney McLaughlin. This race was about the complete opposite from Quincy Hall's. It was her show from start to finish. She breaks the world record once again. It's the seventh time she's done that, which is just an unheard of thing to think about when you have broken your own world record 7 times. Or I guess she's broken her own 6 times, but she's broken the world record 7 times. It's insane stuff. It's super impressive, but I don't think she's actually going to be satisfied until she breaks 50. She's going to get there. I think that's almost a guarantee. But this is just, it's wild. When you look at the race, we talked about Femke earlier, when you have her coming in from this mixed relay, everyone thought it was going to be a super close race. I personally thought Femke would give her a run for her money. Even though I thought that Sydney would win the race, I thought Femke would at least make it close, maybe make it interesting. If Sydney were to slip up, I thought Femke would be there to take advantage of it. But that was not the case whatsoever. She breaks her own world record. It's dominating fashion. 100 meters left into the race. Everyone in the building knows it's over. They're just looking at the clock to see what she's running. And I think when I was watching this race in real time, the biggest advantage for Sydney was that she had the inside lane on Femke. And when you listen to Sydney and you hear what she talks about, she's very focused on just herself and nothing around her, which in track and field, you have to have that, especially in sprints when you're in your own lane. It's really easy to get caught up in what this person in lane 8 is doing or what this person on the inside of you is doing. But Sydney was able to really focus on herself. And I think that was able to benefit her because she could see Femke on her outside. I think we saw Sydney come out on that backstretch a lot more conservative than she typically does. And I think that's because she saw Femke within reach and she knew once she got around that corner, it was going to be wraps. And that's exactly what it was. She dominated the race. She's outstanding. We saw her again on the women's 4x4 that really just put everyone else off the TV screen. And I mean, she's, in my opinion, she's the face of women's track and field. It's really not even close right now. Yes, there's a lot of talent. Some amazing women that we've already talked about at this meet, but Sydney's at the face of it all. She has a great mentality. She has good branding. She is just the pinnacle of women's track and field right now. And there's really no other way to put it. So getting in here to the nitty gritty, number two, I'm going to put the men's 100-meter at number 2 here. I think that for the generic sports fan or the generic track and field fan, this is probably their favorite event. It's the main event. World's fastest man. Who's it going to be? A lot of hype coming into this race just because of how open it was. You have the Americans. Lyles gets in. Bednarik gets in. Fred Kerley gets in, which is kind of a shocker to a lot of people. He ends up medaling and getting the bronze. But then the international stage as well, you have Kishane Thompson from Jamaica. You have Tobogo, like we mentioned. Just a number of guys that probably could have taken this race that we obviously saw were thousandths of a second away from each other. And watching the race in live time, I had no idea who won the race. I thought Thompson looked like he probably came across first, but with the sprints, you never know just because it's so close. And then as you're waiting there for the 30 seconds to 45 seconds in anticipation, waiting to see who wins. And then you see Lyle's name pop up on the score. He starts freaking out. Really just impressive stuff from Noah. We know him as a 200-meter guy. He's talked about wanting to be a 100-meter guy as well, and he's proved that now. He's proved that he is I wouldn't say dominant, but I would say he's a competent champion. He won the world championships last year. A lot of people said it was a fluke. He was able to back it up this year on the biggest stage at the Olympics. And I think he's a serious contender for the double. I think if he's able to stay healthy, he could do it in 2028. That's really far out. So we'll cross that bridge when the time comes. But for now, I think once he got that 100-meter, I think a lot of people figured it was just guaranteed that the double was on. But obviously, due to health reasons and maybe some other stuff that we're just not aware of, it wasn't able to happen. But he took in this 100 meters. Curley gets third, which I really thought was the most impressive part because when you look at Fred Curley's season, he's supposed to run in this meet in New York. He doesn't start. He's complaining about the blocks. His sponsor, ASICS, drops him. He shows up to the Olympic trials looking like a 18-year-old, like swag beast with his Oakley tank. He's got sunglasses because he still has the Oakley sponsor. He's got Nike Max Flies on. So he's repping all the brands, right? But he's able to get himself to Paris and then ultimately get himself on the podium in a race that a lot of people kind of wrote him off on. Obviously, he got silver in Tokyo, and then he was a world champion in Eugene in 2022. I was able to be there for that race. Really impressive stuff. But then the last year or two, he's kind of fallen off the map a little bit. Obviously, he's back. He's back. He's feeling good. He talked about it. I think him being doubted by a lot of people kind of sparked that fire. And I think he's one of those guys where you look at it, the more he gets counted out, the better he's going to run. And he proved that. And I think that was a really awesome moment for him. Me personally, I'm a big Kenny guy. I would have liked to seen Kenny get on the podium there. I felt like he was fit enough to do it. But it's just not the way the chips fell. Kashane Thompson gets second for Jamaica in what was a pretty disappointing, I'd say, Olympics for the Jamaicans, especially when you look at the sprint on the women's side. But this event was really, obviously, it's hyped up. It's the main event of track and field. It's the heavyweight fight. And Noah Lyles was able to take it. And I think this will be one of the events that we look at, and it will just go down in history as one of the greatest races of all time. But at number one, I have the men's 1500 meter. I might be a little biased just due to my distance running background, but when you look at this race, when you look at the storyline and then what ended up happening, it was maybe one of the craziest races I've ever seen. When you look at, like I said, the storyline, you have Jakob Ingebrigtsen and Josh Kerr. Jakob is a defending Olympic champion in Tokyo in 2020. Last year in Budapest, Kerr beats him in the 1500, but Jakob still is a 5K champ, which is kind of interesting because the 1500, I think, has a bigger following than a race like the 5K does. So whenever Jakob loses, it's kind of a bigger deal because he is pretty much the face of distance running. But it feels like he always has this 5K to fall on that almost kind of saves his legacy in a way, because if he was strictly just a 1500-meter runner and he talks all this big game and he loses in the world championships last year, and then obviously looking at the result this year, he gets fourth, it's kind of up for grabs of like, is this guy really who we think he is? But obviously when he takes gold in the 5K every time he loses in the 1500, then it's not as easy to say that he's falling off, right? So those two are the favorites coming in. Jakob takes him out in blazing pace. I think they came through 800 at 150, which is just insane when you really think about it and break that down. When you heard the announcers, they're thinking everyone's just going to drop off. You see some of the Kenyans just falling off left and right because his pace is so fast early on. And the reason for that is because a lot of times in distance racing, you'll see guys slow down when they're running for places and not for times, right? Because things get tactical. People want to wait and kick. They want to conserve their energy towards the end of the race. And Jakob doesn't do that. And I think that's really respectable when you look at the art of track and field. Fans want to see athletes run at their fastest, right? So for him to be able to bring that pace out really made the race what it was. So when you get 2 to 3 laps in, you have Jakob leading, Kerr's right behind him. And then Hawker and Naguse are kind of just hanging around. They're in there. They look like they might fall off, but then they kind of close the gap. So you really don't know who's going to take it, right? Going into the final lap, you see Hawker making moves. They come around the bend. And then with about 150 left, I mean, you see Jakob, the pace his foot speed and his turnover kind of starts to slow down. We've seen it before last year in Budapest when Kerr beat him. And so at this point, I'm thinking Kerr's got it, right? Well, that was not the case, obviously. So it's just a bolt to the finish line, and Hawker ultimately takes it, and just in such a weird way to win the race, right? Because typically you see guys, they pass on the outside, they get around, and it's just a straight deadbeat line to the home stretch. Well, in this case, you see him push Jakob, and what kind of gives Jakob a little boost with about 80 meters left. So Hawker, all his momentum has to slow down, and then he's able to pick that back up and then still get past Jakob and ultimately outleans Kerr at the line. Um, I guess not outlean, but he still beat him. So Hawker takes the gold, Kerr comes in second, and then the Goose, who typically isn't known for his kick, looked really strong that last stretch, which was really good to see. And he ends up getting the bronze. Jakob comes in fourth. Really just a crazy race. It was the first time we've seen two Americans on the 1,500-meter podium in the last, I think they said 112 years, which is insane when you think about it. And so just to see that happen, it was super inspirational. I mean, Hawker's not a guy that, yes, he's been around. We saw him at the collegiate level. He performed very well, national champion at U of O. But then he's not like I mentioned earlier, he's not a Jakob. He's not a Josh Kerr. He's not a Sydney McLaughlin, right? He's not necessarily the face of distance running. If you're not a diehard track fan, you probably don't know who he is. And he's not necessarily built like a distance runner. He's short, he's squatty, he has kind of a weird form at the end, but he gets the job done. And ultimately, he took the gold medal in Olympic record time. So that was really awesome to see. And just kind of the storylines, how fast they switch was kind of the crazy part for me, where it goes from this one-on-one battle of Jakob and Kerr, who's going to get it, who's the better runner. They're going back and forth. Jakob saying Kerr never shows up to race. Kerr kind of says his things, but he stays relatively quiet. And ultimately, Hawker steals the show. And I think for me, that was the best part, is that you just have this underdog guy. He comes out of nowhere. And then the Goose also is kind of like the Robin to the Batman, where he's playing his role. He takes third, he outbeats Ingebrigtsen, and just was probably one of the most legendary 1,500-meter races we've ever seen. Hawker ran I think he ran 3:27. So when you think about it at the professional level, if you're dropping 3 seconds in a race on a PR, that's just unheard of. And then one of the most underrated parts about this race, I felt like, was Hobbs Kessler's performance, where he takes fifth overall. He's super young. He's 20. He's going to be in this game for a while. And so to see him perform that well on that high of a level was awesome. He stuck with the pace. He was in it. I think if this was one of those slower races and more tactical, like we talked about, I think he's in a really good position to get a medal, kind of similar to where Nagus was. But I'm really excited about Kessler's future. And I think the exciting part about this race is that all these guys are young. Hawker's 23. Nagus is up and coming. We talked about how young Kessler is. And so when you look at it, these guys are going to be around for a while, which makes you think that the U.S. is going to be able to produce more people on the medal stand for years to come in the 1,500. So that's my top 10 list of moments of the Olympics this year for track and field. It was a great event. Track's one of my favorite sports to watch here at the Olympics, and really just some interesting stuff. So to see the U.S. team perform the way they did was awesome. I think the distance team was probably the most impressive part for me, just because you're used to seeing Kenyans, Ethiopians, some Europeans when you look at the more middle distances. And so just amazing stuff. So that's going to do it for this episode of Chop It Up. Be sure to subscribe and like this video, and we'll see you on the next one.